preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
This week, our guest critic is Stewart Klein. The film which Mr. Klein has chosen is Body and Soul. I will let him tell you about the film. I would like, however, to take a moment to introduce him. Stewart Klein has been giving reports and critiques on the arts and entertainment for Metro Media Channel 5's 10 o'clock news since its inception in 1967. He was appointed entertainment editor in 1969. Prior to joining the staff at WNEW, where he also co-hosted the station's daytime talk show, The New Yorker, Mr. Klein was a newswriter, editor, and broadcaster for ABC News, as well as the feature editor on the Flair Reports, a daily ABC radio news program, the staff of which included Ted Koppel and Charles Osgood. Mr. Klein was the recipient of an Emmy Award in 1978 for his review, delivered in Latin, of the controversial film Sebastian, in Latin with subtitles. Mr. Klein's humor and wit add a special dimension to a substantively serious critiques of the arts. It is indeed an honor to have him here with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stewart Klein.
Thank you very much. You've all heard of youth cult movies, things like I Was a Teenage Werewolf and the Rocky Horror Show. Well, perhaps Body and Soul has brought us together in what I might call a more mature cult. How many of you, just for the record, have seen Body and Soul before? How many of you have seen it many times? How many of you have seen it every time it turns up at 2 o'clock in the morning on a late show? Okay. Is there anyone here who has never seen Body and Soul? All right. I will not tell you too much about it then. I don't like to talk about movies before we see it anyhow. But just a few facts. The marvelous cast of this film is headed by John Garfield, who was nominated for an Academy Award for his performance. I think he was at the height of his powers as a leading man. This is 1947. The film editors of Body and Soul, Robert Parrish and Francis Lyon, won Oscars for their work on this picture. The cinematography, which is smashing, is by James Wong Howe. And in the climactic scene, take notice of what happens in the ring. And Howe, during that scene, wore roller skates inside the ring and used a handheld camera. Rather revolutionary at that time. I'll tell you more about the cinematography after the picture. The marvelous score, with its haunting title song, is by Johnny Green. And I've won bets from musicians who have invariably said the song was written by Gershwin because the music is so pure New York. All of these elements have been put together in a gutsy, pounding style by director Robert Rossen. Now, on these qualities alone, I think Body and Soul is a marvelous old-fashioned melodrama that ranks with some of the stuff we remember from the Warner Brothers gangster movies of the 30s. But there is another facet about this movie which I think has never been recognized, and that is why I have chosen to show it to you tonight. I'll only say a few words about it, and then you can see for yourself. This picture was made in 1947. It was at that exact same time that the House Un-American Activities Committee was subpoenaing figures in Hollywood to prove their loyalty before the committee. Almost everyone in this picture, almost all of the principals, wound up on the blacklist. I think Body and Soul, essentially a movie about boxing, is more than just about boxing. We'll talk about it more in a minute. I hope you enjoy it. How about those of you who have never seen it before? Was it a revelation? I don't know. For me, I think it's the greatest boxing film that has ever been made. And when you compare it to Rocky, I say, pui. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. This movie was originally scheduled to be a picture called Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. That was the title of the original script. And it was supposed to be a biography of Barney Ross, the three-time welterweight champion of the world, a real character. It was going to be a biographical movie. Right before production was to begin, a headline came out, story broke, that Barney Ross, great boxing champion and also a Marine hero in the Second World War, was a drug addict. He had been wounded during the war, was treated with morphine, and the habit stuck. Well, remember now, this is 1947, and anyone addicted to drugs was a pariah. And the thought of making a movie about a hero who was revealed in the press to be a drug addict, regardless of how the addiction began, was just impossible. So the movie was shelved, or at least they had planned to scratch it all together, when the director, Robert Rossen, threatened to sue. Well, after a much heated argument, they finally decided to revise the script and go ahead and shoot it. They began shooting and had about half of it completed when Rossen had a great deal of difficulty on his mind about how the film should end. Does the guy lose and give in to the gamblers that controlled him? Or does he turn around and win and sacrifice everything? Throw away every nickel he's got and say to hell with it. Well, there was a great deal of discussion. The screenwriter, Abraham Polanski, insisted that he go ahead and win and throw away everything. And that's the ending they finally kept. But what always killed me about this film is, aside from the fact that it works on a melodramatic level, sure, there's a lot of corny aspects to it, but as pure melodrama, as crafted stuff, I mean, it flows, it works, there's an edge to it, it looks right, it sounds right, and you believe it, and there's an action to it that grips you. But beyond that, I always had the feeling, I could be wrong, that this was a statement against the witch hunters of the time. At the very time that this movie was completed, was about to be completed, Robert Rossen was subpoenaed by the House Committee on Un-American Activities. He was one of the original 19 witnesses in 1947, which later became the Hollywood 10, the unfriendly 10 who were jailed, Dalton Trumbo and the rest of them. Through circumstances, Rossen was not among those 10. He was excused. And in the incredible book, Naming Names by Victor Navasky, a history of that entire period, which I heartily recommend to you, Rossen was torn on what he was to do if he had to testify before the committee. Does he cooperate with the committee? Or does he tell the committee, just go screw yourself? Pardon my language, but I'm softening this up. In that same book, Rossen's widow said that was exactly his sentiment, to tell the committee to screw themselves, only he used much fiercer language. As things turned out, almost all the principals in this movie were blacklisted. And as a result, many of their careers were interrupted, some destroyed completely. Robert Rossen, the director, blacklisted. Abraham Polanski, the screenwriter. John Garfield, the principal actor. Anne Revere, the marvelous actress who played his mother. Canada Lee, the black fighter who was his sparring partner. Shimon Ruskin, the actor who was the delivery boy from the fruit store and said he was going to bet on Charlie. All of these people had their careers interrupted or destroyed because they would not cooperate with the committee. And even later on, some of them desperately seeking to regain their careers, to go back to work after being out of work for several years and starving. Some of them, to their everlasting regret, went before the committee and cooperated and so-called named names. Rossen was one of them. He was out of work for several years after making this movie. He lived in Mexico almost as a political exile, and he was going nuts. He couldn't do what he wanted to do. He couldn't make movies. And to restore himself, he went back before the committee and named names. And he was a tortured man for the rest of his life, living with this cross on his conscience. And there was one line that I read in Novatsky's book, Naming Names, that I'd like to read to you. It was made by Carl Foreman, the famous, noted screenwriter and director, who was blacklisted himself. He was the screenwriter of High Noon. He wrote The Bridge on the River Kwai, which won an Oscar, but because a fictitious name of the screenwriter was put on that screenplay, Foreman could not receive the Oscar that was due him. This is what Foreman said, talking about that time in Hollywood of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He said this: "Those of us who lived through the era of fear in Hollywood have some slight conception of the guts it took for one man to stand up and risk his livelihood and his future in defense of a principle, a refusal to compromise his honor." Now, Foreman was talking about the tenor of the times in Hollywood, and it always seemed to me, this could be wishful thinking, that when Garfield said to Arnold Roberts, Lloyd Goff, at the end of the film, and Lloyd Goff, by the way, was another guy who was blacklisted. When Garfield, after refusing to throw to the fight, said to him, "What are you going to do? Kill me?" Everybody dies. He was just throwing away his future, his career, his $60,000. It seemed to me that Rossen and Polanski and the creators of this film were putting themselves on record against the red witch hunters of the time. And that's why I think this movie has always had, aside from its surface melodramatic appeal, I think a powerful statement about the tenor of the times in which it was made. Anyhow, that's one reason why I loved it. I'm willing to open this up to questions if anybody wants to talk. Yes? Who? Oh, yeah, he came back and he went on to make such terrific movies as The Hustler with Paul Newman in 1960, which I guess will always stand as his best. But he was a tortured figure. He made his agreement with the committee. He cleared himself by going before the committee in a torturous process. He did not want to name names, and they insisted on it. It was the only way he could clear himself by, quote, turning informer. And for the next 10 years of his life, he worked and was a tortured man who hated his own existence. Anyone else? I agree with you. That's one of the stinky points of the movie. Lilli Palmer, I think we'd all agree, is slightly miscast. They never quite explain what this girl, this daughter of a druggist who apparently came from upstate New York, I'm sorry, this print is a little scratchy. You couldn't hear the dialogue as clear as I'd like. But what Lilli Palmer came to be doing in that movie, I don't know. And it's... Lilli Palmer was not blacklisted, but she, in her own way, had her own little ordeal to face. Lilli Palmer was a Jewish actress in Vienna when the Nazis walked in and took over, and got out by the skin of her teeth after she had been asked to stay by some people who were playing ball with the Nazis to stick around in Vienna. She was a very popular young, pretty star, and she got out. So she had her own little skirmish with fascism. I don't know. I think it was in the middle 40s. Yes, ma'am. I think he did. I think Dalton Trumbo, I think they all did. I cannot think of an instance right off the top of my head, but I would, if you have not read Naming Names, I strongly recommend to you. It's written by Victor Navasky. It's out in paperback, and it is an incredibly sharp and moving and detailed piece of history and of a torturous time. It's a remarkable book. Yes. Just before you continue, who was the one who wrote Exodus under a false name? Was it Trumbo? But it was one of the original blacklisted writers, one of the original Hollywood 10, wrote Exodus under a false name. I'm sorry, ma'am. Go ahead. You were going to ask a question. This was well received. I mean, Garfield won an Academy Award. He was nominated for an Academy Award. The film editors won an Academy Awards. It was the movie that established Rossen as a box office director. This was his second film in Hollywood, and it established him as a hard-hitting director who could take material that was not the greatest and turn it into a gutsy, hard-hitting picture. So, and it made money. I chose it because I think the political aspect of the film has never, ever been mentioned. I could be completely mistaken, but I think the best movies reflect their times, and I think this one did in its own unique way that has never been talked about. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, she said that she had been through. Well, that's a possibility. That she was a refugee from Germany who passed through these capitals and came home. Well, at the very end, Garfield was left with the choice. No. Let's get on there. Let me explain this to you, sir. Long before Senator McCarthy, there were witch hunts. In 1947, the House Committee on Un-American Activities started its probe of Hollywood, and it had done one long before, even before the Second World War. But in 1947, the House, this is a couple of years before Senator McCarthy, I think, was even in the Senate, this House committee started to investigate and subpoena figures in Hollywood as part of a red witch hunt to judge their loyalty, to see if they were putting subversion into their movies. It was mainly a publicity stunt. That's when this whole business in Hollywood began. Well, you're entitled to your opinion. You do not see at the end that this man was willing to stand up for principle, not allow himself to throw a fight and be knocked out, throw away his entire livelihood and future. All right, could be. You could be right. Pardon me? Possible, sure. That's another point in it. I think so. The young woman said, don't you think a more valid point of view would be that the guy was fighting for his Judaism, the fact that he was a Jew and standing up? I think that's a very valid point. I think that's part of it. This is only my personal interpretation. I could be completely wet. Anyone else? Yes. Oh, all right. They didn't know how to end this movie. And Rossen didn't know whether to have the guy lose the fight or win the fight at the end. Well, James Wong Howe, the cameraman, incidentally, his name was James Howe, and they thought it would be fancier if they added the name Wong to it. And they threw that in just for box office purposes. He did it before that, but it was just a affectation. Anyhow, Howe said, listen, we could shoot this film both ways. You decide how you end it in the editing room, but we can do it both ways. And he said, the way we'll do it, instead of the standard fight scene with a couple of cameras, he said, I'm going to go out and hire 4 non-union cameramen. As a matter of fact, he hired 4 veterans of the war, combat cameramen, gave them all handheld cameras, tell them to roam around and shoot everything. He put himself on roller skates. Howe did. And went around the ring. They shot all this stuff. He told the 4 freelance camera guys he hired to shoot anything they wanted. Just shoot. Shoot whatever they saw. So they had this thousands and thousands of incredible feet of solid film. And then it was up to Rossen to decide how to edit it and how to complete the story. They could have done it either way. And they finally decided to go ahead and make Garfield win the fight. And the film editor, Robert Parrish, was one of the heroes in convincing Rossen to end it that way. Sir. The Champion. No. Champion was based on a story by Ring Lardner. Well, Champion was more of a rotten guy who was, I think the core of that movie was, here was this public figure, a boxing champion depicted as a great hero, when the fact of the matter was he was a creep who beat up his crippled brother, remember Arthur Kennedy? And he did everything that was bad. Way in the back. I didn't hear your question. Could you talk louder? Well, I wouldn't go that far to say Garfield's known for having black co-stars. He had. No, in those two movies, I think it's not unusual to have a black sparring partner in a boxing film, or to have a black boat attendant, a boat helper, mate in what was the name of that? The Breaking Point. I don't think it's that unusual. Yes. I think you're absolutely right. And as a matter of fact, in the version, the other version that Rossen was going to make, that's exactly how it was going to end. He was going to lose the fight, something was going to happen, he was going to get shot in a related incident, and that would have been the end of the picture. Yes? No, that was William Holden. Next question. Anyone else? Anything else I can tell you about this movie? Yes, sir. Thanks a lot. Shut up. I know what you're saying. Am I being fair to the play? This is a question I've heard 10,000 times. Am I being fair to the play by running back 10 minutes after seeing it and talking about it? Well, first of all, I don't run back 10 minutes after seeing it. As a matter of fact, when I first started to do this 20 years ago, review plays, producers insisted that critics come on opening night and then go running back and writing their reviews. I had a little more time. I had about an hour. And many producers felt that a critic's first white-hot impressions would be the real ones. So you'd go see a play, you'd get in a cab, run back, and write your review and do it. And we did it because the producers wanted us to do that. And I remember the Times hired a critic, Stanley Kaufman, for a while. And Stanley said it wasn't fair to the play to review it in just that quick a time. And he wanted to go to a preview. Well, I created an uproar. All of Broadway was in a snit because this man wanted 2 days to write his review, not that night. And there was a big brouhaha, and Kaufman eventually, after just a couple of months, left the Times. Well, nowadays, almost every critic does go a day beforehand. Nowadays, producers will give you 2 or 3 dates, maybe 2 or 3 different performances to see before the official opening night. And almost every newspaper critic does go the day before because all the newspapers now are automated. And the inside entertainment pages, they want in the can almost 18 hours in advance. So the Times review that you see in the New York Times is actually written the day before the show officially opens. So we still have time, and I think I have discovered that whether I have 1 hour or 1 day or 1 week to write a review, my opinion of it doesn't change. The more time I have, it makes it a little physically easier, but my viewpoint doesn't change about a play. What you think about it when you leave the theater is the same thing you think about it a week later. I hope I've answered your question. Anything else? Listen, I just wanted to say that for as long as I can remember, it's been over 35 years since I've first seen Body and Soul. I wanted to talk about it, and I finally had an occasion to do so. So thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.